we're talking about reducing complexity, getting efficiencies, and actually optimising your whole compliance process around IFRS 16. So thanks for everyone for joining. Again, really appreciate everyone's support. We get some great feedback from people around these, so we'll continue to do it. Today, what we're going to talk about is sort of identifying gaps, because I think one of the key things that we'll see throughout this process is taking a step back, looking at your process. What are some tips? What are the benefits if you actually start implementing some of these tips and improvements? Audit's coming up for a lot of people, that June 30 deadline. A lot of people have gone through audit recently as well. So what are the findings and what sort of tips and tricks we can add from there? And then finally, let's talk about technology. Everyone's talking about AI, where it fits, etc. We've got some interesting takes on that as well. Now, before I get started, who have we got here today? So I'd like to welcome Noraini. Noraini is the head of finance at Connexa and has a really, really interesting and unique background because of this, quite encompassing. So Noraini, what sort of drew you to the role at Connexa? Because it's obviously, a big role. You've got a couple of thousand leases.
Yeah. Well, so Connexa, as a background, Connexa is a mobile tower for infrastructure company in New Zealand, and it's a fairly new company. It was established in 2022, and it was built off a acquisition of tower asset from the two major telco in New Zealand. So in the sense, it's almost like a startup where things are starting from ground up. There's a lot of things you can do to improve and build the company from ground up. However, it is also a company that started out with like a huge backing from shareholders, and it also has a very solid agreement with the net telco provider in New Zealand, guaranteed revenue over a number of years, basically. So it's that it has an element of a complex infrastructure company, but it's also the startup element where you can do a lot still. You're not going and being put into a box and do one job. You're across everything. So that's the major drawing point for me to join Connexa.
You've got those two different parts. So you've got the startup, which can be quite exciting. You've got to do a lot of different things, but also good to have some solid backing.
Solid backing, and also so you're not a struggling startup.
Okay, speaking of struggling startups, Stefan, CFO of Quadrant, and basically head of our LOIS Lease Accounting and Compliance tool. I mean, we've been doing this 6-7 years now. What's some of the sort of strangest processes or surprising things that you've seen during your time here?
I think most people thought that when IFRS 16 came along in 2019, it would be like a year-long thing. People would get a system and it would be done and it would be forgotten, like most of the IFRS standards that have come along. It's just kept on going. It's been harder than people thought, and actually the XRB have just come out with a proposal that they want to look at the implementations and see how they went, and I think it's probably safe to say that it was a lot harder than people expected. So it's been one of those things that we thought it would lose its relevance slightly over the years, but if anything, it's still kind of front and center. And now we're moving away from compliance and forward looking to ROI and actual return on having systems and the like.
Do you think it's taken a lot longer for people to actually understand the complexities of what the IRB put in place to get to here now and go, okay, then how do we actually work with it in a better way as opposed to fighting against it because it's compliance?
I think IFRS 15 came out just before IFRS 16, and that was a pretty tricky standard as well. But the difference with that standard was, although it was tricky, it only really applied to certain companies, and that, again, bigger companies that have complex revenue recognition. IFRS 16 affects everyone. There's very few big companies that don't have an IFRS 16 component, and also with the nature of leases is they're all non-standard. I mean, a property lease will be different from an equipment lease, from a horticultural lease to an agricultural lease. So there's a lot of complexity there and getting data from lots of different points. So that is what is, I guess, caught people out and made it something that probably a lot of people had hoped it would go away by now. Obviously, it hasn't.
No, it's here to stay. So keeping that in mind, what we're going to do today is we've tried to sort of identify 5 different areas like we talked about before in the agenda, and some questions around there, and utilising the experience of the panelists here to actually just give some insights, on the ground insights into what can be done, what people have seen, because it's in the area that we see quite often is that, why do you do it that way? It's because I've always done it that way. And so people haven't looked at it since 2018-19 when this was implemented. So getting into our first question, look, we're identifying and addressing gaps in IFRS 16 compliance. Noraini, for an organisation like yourselves, or what you've seen in your previous life, so to speak, what are people overlooking, or gaps that aren't quite as apparent as probably what they are outside looking in?
I think people put quite low emphasis on the quality of data and end-to-end process. The initial investment in getting a good cleanup data and a structured process actually helped along the way. It reduced time, the future time spent, basically. That's basically it. And the other thing is, I think there is also a conception that IFRS 16, implementation and process is a compliance exercise, like let's just do it, tick the box. It contributes to operational decision as well. So yeah, those are the 2 things that I really kind of learned from doing this at Connexa.
Do you think that there's a process that you should be going through with regards to stages to try and identify these?
Look, there is, if I can talk about the pain point that we went through, so like I said, Connexa is we acquire tower asset from the 2 major telco in New Zealand, and that comes legacy leases. So lack of documentation is one of the biggest pain point. So the preparation at inception is really crucial. Getting all the right information in there, making sure the documentation is there. And also we were quite lucky and unlucky. We were quite lucky in the sense that because it's a new company, we were able to run this process and in parallel do the policy, the IFRS 16 policy, and go, what needs to be in there? How do we treat this? How do we treat that? When you are clear about how you're going to treat your, lease at inception, your modification, things sort of flow through properly. So the data piece, the policy, you put your guardrail in terms of like, this is how we're going to do things. It's really, really crucial.
Cool.
Yeah.
Stefan, I think that data is going to be a common theme throughout today's chat. What's it from your perspective?
I think that's a really insightful answer, because the data one is relatively obvious. We all know that if you put bad data in, you get bad data out. But I think the overlay of process and policy was forgotten. And that's really about where you have, if you don't have that policy of how you're treating things, although you might be collecting the right data points, then those assumptions flow through to give you the wrong outcomes. So one of the things that we saw a lot of in the IFRS 16 compliance, and especially with the people that might have gone to spreadsheets or non-systemized outputs, was they collated the data and did the calculations. So there was no guide rails of having that policy and assumptions. So of course, as soon as an auditor came in, they said, well, how does this work? And there wasn't that documentation and that backing. So not only was there a data problem, but there was a policy problem, that there were no guide rails, so to speak. And that's been really common. And we often see that, especially when we onboard customers that didn't originally transition with us, that they don't necessarily know how they transitioned.
Now, is that an issue that you see across the board, or do you actually see that there's other issues around the different silos? So you've got the silos of finance. Finance is the crux of the people that we're talking to at the moment, but we know that IFRS 16 spreads across finance, property, fleet, into strategic management decisioning, etc. So, what are the gaps that people are seeing there, and how do we identify it? How do we take that step back?
So interestingly enough, the problem didn't identify itself at transition because people realized that they had to collate all their information. So what happened was a lot of people went out and they collated the information from fleet, from finance, from property, and they did the transition and it went swimmingly, right? But then because they didn't either have a policy or a good process, as time went by, they started to get into trouble.
Yep.
So into trouble in that those silos of information didn't flow properly, or they didn't have the policy and process to make sure that they would go through the gates that they needed. So interestingly enough, I think most people got through transition relatively okay if they were sensible, but then a lot got into trouble that they'd done this big data collection exercise, high fives all round, we've transitioned 6 months in, oh, we haven't really had that data flow to us, we haven't made these modifications, and that's where people and systems got into trouble. So a lot of systems didn't really cope with the lack of information in a timely fashion. So backdating of transactions and stuff was a problem. So I think that there was such a focus on transition that people didn't realize that actually that was kind of easy. You could do it in spreadsheets, but it was the modifications and that ongoing flow that was the problem.
Yeah, and I'll echo that too. I think when you're collating data in a spreadsheet, just as a one-off exercise, one of course, it's a manual process and it's prone to error. You've got duplicate entries and all that kind of stuff. But once you have clean data, it's the ongoing process. If you don't have a structured system in place, then you're going to come across a similar problem at the end of it. And the silo between team or department in a company, for if I use myself an example, property owned the data, but finance owned the accounting transaction. So the bridging between the two, if you're not getting the information on time, if you don't have a process to get the data, and also it's the awareness of it, where I think it's a bit of a black box, what the system generated. People don't understand what it means. So there's the bridging and then there's the awareness. So once you kind of move that gap, you remove the silos. And it's for us, the learnings from Connexa is we have this year, I feel like we are more proactive rather than reactive by removing the silos, having a structured system and processes.
What were some of the most surprising things? Because you've done it recently,
yeah,
and it's almost like going back to a transition. What were some of the most surprising gaps that you found? Or that you can tell us as well.
Well, no. It's actually
your auditors. I've had a check, and the auditors haven't joined.
So to be honest, I think for me at least, I'm very like conceptual. I kind of go, all right, the step-by-step things. But we're talking about lease agreement here. There are a lot of other nuances to it. It's not just your standard. Here's your lease. Here's how we're going to change it every year. There are. If you actually read the agreement properly, some of them has, there is, if I can give example for other agreements that I've seen for a construction company, there is lease during construction, lease after construction. There are nuances that it's not, box standard things. So that's probably one of the things where you go, here's my standard data, everything done. And then there's all these nuances that creeps out after that. So, okay, yes. So that's probably one. And then the other thing is really I wouldn't say surprise, but it's just when you start talking to each other, when, property is talking finance, you kind of go, you get a lot more insight. And that doesn't just drive the decision for IFRS 16, it actually drives decision for other stuff. So if I can share, if things are not done well, these are things that have not happened, but I was like, well, that could have been a risk in the future where if a company it's quite common for a company to be funded, a funding structure for, debt and equity. You have a lease liability that's building up, but you're not recording it correctly. You might be breaching your debt covenant without realizing it. So those kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, massive risk. Stefan, one of the things I think that we experienced and got a lot of feedback, certainly in the initial phases of the standard being implemented, was if you've got a system, if you put it in, the outputs are going to be right. Talk to me about that.
Well, I think it's like anything. People assume systems do what they say on the tin, but that's like comparing a Honda Civic to a Ferrari. The Ferrari will go a lot faster than a Honda Civic, and so with systems, you've obviously got a speed analogy, but probably more importantly, there's a lot of grey areas in IFRS 16, and that judgment and calculation and technical calculation. A lot of the systems that people, to Noraini's point, was a black box and the numbers spat out. They just assumed it would be right. And I think a lot of people have kind of been a little bit caught out that it's like, well, system says X or Y is that. It's like, because the system says it. Well, it's like, well, no, where's your proof? And that's a bit about doing your own due diligence, having ISO, having SOC reports and all of that kind of thing. So it's been interesting in the industry. There's been a lot of players kind of fall away a bit because they have had problems with their systems.
And I think it also goes back to what you pointed out, Noraini, is if you don't have that solid base with regards to the data, that's Stefan, you started off with saying it, rubbish in, rubbish out. So that process piece and understanding the data, where it's coming from, because that's another piece we'll explore a little bit later, where that data is coming from, how do you know it's right?
Yeah.
All those checks and balances.
Yeah, that's right. But it's also to Stefan's point in terms of the system, the transparency from the system is also critical because it rubbish in, rubbish out. You go, right, how do I check? I really enjoyed the clean audit trail that I was able to look at from the system, from LOIS, to kind of follow the trail and go, if the information that the system is spitting out is not what I expected, I'm able to go back in and go, right, that's how it's calculated. This is where we went wrong. So there is the middle bridging ground of the system as well.
Cool. Okay. Well, I think it's been really good coverage of identifying the gaps and why you need to do it. What are some of the tips? Given literally you going through the process and that at the moment, what are some of the practical tips that you can share that people that are watching can go, okay, then I can take this back to my organisation because I haven't thought about it or haven't had time? We get a lot of people saying, we just don't have time to implement, we don't have time to do this, we don't have time to review our process. What tips can you give that give people some form of confidence to say, take a step back, it's worth it in the end?
When you talk about system implementation, I think people think about it as bigger than it needs to be. For us, the process I think it can be completed within 6 weeks if done right. And you put the practical tips is really put the effort into getting it right at inception, really, and then the process and structure going forward in terms of if the monthly process for us now, it doesn't take long at all, and it saves so much time from the team perspective, where I can allocate time for my team to do other analysis rather than wrangling data. The monthly process that used to take days is now a few hours, or automation. Yeah.
So you're basically saying, like, this time last year, as you're preparing for audit, it's taking days. Now we're getting into
it's taking days, but you're also in the position last year where I was slightly uncomfortable going, am I audit ready? What am I going to give? Are we able to look at the operational side of things, what we're paying out versus what the IFRS 16 side of things is doing? But so this year I have proper report, and I know what's going on. The system is kind of doing what I want it to do. You feel a bit more audit ready this year. So yeah. And what else can I say? I would say get your property team, fleet team buy-in into it. That will save you a whole heaps of time.
And if we dig deeper into that comment, it's driven most of the time. We sort of saw there were a couple of different scenarios. It would either be driven by finance because it was compliance was required, and then property flowed afterwards. You are a heavy property business, given towers, etc., which is 99.9% of your assets. Why was finance driving it, not property?
So we do have, we run two systems in parallel. Our property team run their operational system, property system, and finance run the IFRS 16. And for us, it's more around, and I'm going to sound like I'm a control freak now, but it's
You're
more
surrounded by them, don't worry, you'll be fine.
it's more about making sure that we are, as a finance person, we are the last gate before the money leaves the company. It's also for me to kind of be comfortable that we are reporting right, signing off the right thing. Yeah, there's additional layer of review basically. And also it is a IFRS compliant thing. Property team initially were not even across why we're doing it. I mean, not to say not even across, not aware of the IFRS 16 until we kind of bring them in journey with it. Yeah.
No, that makes total sense. Stefan, like from your perspective, again, ton of experience in implementing these sorts of processes and helping organisations implement it. You know, what's best practice from your perspective?
I think you just have to make it as simple as possible. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking, I've bought a system, I'm done, right? I'll just put it in and I'll spin it out. And then also what tends to happen is obviously you got to get your data right. That's a real given. But echoing earlier comments, you got to get your process right and that information flowing properly. You need a system that's fit for purpose. So you need a system that's not really finicky about being used and it's hard to use and no one needs to know how to do it. We're in an age where people average 2.5 years in their current job. So you're going to have a system that's easy to use, pretty flexible.
Interview this morning. 18 years, I'm well overdue.
Exactly. So you're going to have that flexibility to do that. But again, if you have a process, the process will feed the data, which will feed the system. The system should do everything that you need it to do. What we tend to find is people kind of overcomplicate the process. So the good thing about IFRS 16 and finance in general, it's a monthly cycle. So you don't need to be in the system every day. Batch it all up, wait for once a month,
Yes.
process it all through, let the system do all the heavy lifting. Doesn't matter if it's in the past, it will do the reconciliations, it will do the journals, then do your control checks to Noraini's point, control reports, audit logs, and then your report you're expecting to your ERP and you're done. And it should be really that simple if you're through a process. And some clients now have it completely down pat. It's literally a matter of hours. With others might fall into the mistake of kind of going, I need to be constantly on this and doing this and touching it. And you know, it's just like multitasking is hard. You just follow a very, really strict process, feed the data and make sure that data is right. It doesn't need to be as timely as people would think because of the cycle of month ends and cutoffs. That's probably not as important. And then again, then you can use that data for things other than compliance as well. But the compliance piece should be relatively easy with the right system.
What about the difference between doing it monthly and annually? We got, you know, certainly at the start, a lot of people did it right at the end because it was just compliance and doing a couple of journals. What are the pros and cons of that?
It depends on your business. I mean, some businesses have very few leases and very few changes in leases, so you could probably get away with it. I think most businesses, however, have more leases and changes. So on average, I'd say a lease would change probably once a year on average, and some are more than that with market reviews, CPIs and the like. Once they start to change, it becomes difficult. And also the idea that it's a compliance thing. It is a compliance thing, but it's also a checkpoint that you are actually paying the right amounts. So you don't tend to see property go horribly wrong and you're paying completely the wrong amount, but you may see property miss key dates because they don't have it and they might accidentally renew and they didn't really mean to, all the like. But really around fleet especially, we see a lot of bad commercial outcomes from leases either going into rollover, the wrong amounts being paid, leases extended, all the like, just because it's a processing thing. But that can actually be used to give a good commercial outcome.
And you start to identify things like that lease has been in rollover for 2 years. What's going on there? You know, you do unpick things as you do it. And to Stefan's point as well, like for Connexa, we've got thousands of leases. We just couldn't afford to go 1 year before updating something. So the process of like batching it up once a month and agreeing with property going, you do the rent payment on certain date. You have to do your rent changes on a certain date. We'll get the file on certain date and we'll do this. Yeah.
But even if you talked about portfolio size, say 100 leases, do you reckon from a total amount of time, if you did it monthly, at least annually, what would be greater? If you added up 12 months of annual processes, if you had it down pat to all of a sudden you pick it up, you have to start from scratch in 12 months.
Well, I think I should be going the other way, but to be honest, I think it would be pretty simple, pretty similar. What I think you'll miss, and the thing that always kind of surprises me, is you'll miss any actual commercial errors. So when we released the fleet product and the automation of that kind of overview between fleet and what you're paying, the amount of times that people were just paying what the fleet provider would say, they just paid it, right? With that product that goes right out, well, we've actually had 10 extensions this month. So you go back to fleet and go, have we actually extended 10 leases? And they'll be like, no. So, oh, well, so straight away, you've saved that money, or at least had an area that you need to look at. So if you're doing anything on an annual basis, that's gone, right? And so therefore, doing anything on a monthly basis could potentially take more time. I don't think it really would, but more importantly, it enables you to make decisions faster and with current data.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Now, I mean, some of this is reasonably straightforward because, it makes sense. But, Noraini, from your perspective, what are some of the key benefits you've got out of tightening up, reviewing, and refining that process for your IFRS 16 compliance and management?
Compliance and management. I think we can, I can summarize everything that we've discussed. Like, it has streamlined the process, free up time for my team, compliance, identifying commercial, decision early, and really peace of mind.
We talk about the commercial aspects all the time, and that's what people are after. But when we were putting this together, we started talking about the personal benefits. From a we're in a situation at the moment. Economy's not that great. There's different things going on around the world. Everyone is at 110% capacity. Now, how important are the personal benefits of doing this? Even though it's only a small part of most people's jobs, what's the flow on for that?
Yeah, when you free up, so I think most people have this. My team, they want to do something that is value added, do more analysis, something that drives value to the business. When you streamline process, first it's structured and clean, but second, you free up time to do more stuff rather than a repetitive process that needs to be done every month, which potentially we can talk about AI, but it's just it's more of a personal, to your point, like personal satisfaction of I can actually do more things that grow my knowledge.
I think over the years, accountants have always used spreadsheets, right? It's it would be a very strange accountant not to be proficient in a spreadsheet. However, what that often means is you'll make do and you'll use a spreadsheet where it's really not fit for purpose. And it's interesting, during this process, we would often talk to senior leaders and we'd talk about IFRS 16. It's like, oh no, that's done. That's fine. It's not an issue for us. And then you drop down a layer to the people doing it. And it's like, it takes me like a week, a month, and I'm doing all this and I hate it. And it's a stupid standard. And why do we do it? And it's like, yeah, well, that's exactly why that personal bit is, if you can make people's jobs easier to do more interesting things, it's a win-win for the people and for the business. In this age, and the age of work from home, all of that enablement of staff with proper systems and processes is just much more valuable, because everyone knows that retaining staff is better than tuning staff.
Funny you say that, because I got to a point where I thought, this IFRS 16 without proper system and processes is so painful and it takes so much time. If I can't fix that side of the thing, I'm try and put myself on the board of the XRB and change it.
Yeah, that's an extreme view of it. But again, it's showing the frustration. Like everyone knows, it's even if you're logging into Teams or back in the day, Skype, and it wasn't working, and you get levels of frustration that you don't need because you're just trying to get stuff done. So, again, there are the obvious benefits of it, but I think, as you said and rightly pointed out, there's levels below that people actually don't take into account.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing that often in big businesses, there's lots of focus on the things that have got high priority, and quite rightly, you've got to make sales. So this is not involved in sales, but however, this is a big number, right? Most companies, their IFRS 16 right of use asset is bigger than their debt balance. So it makes a big difference. And then if you're getting it wrong, that's a problem. So making sure that the staff that are responsible for this area are enabled to be able to do it is really quite important.
Well, even some of the Kantar results that we got recently. So we did a survey of, a lot of enterprise companies, in this space. Well over a quarter of them are highlighting tedious, time-consuming processes as the biggest confusion. Like, do you want to talk to some of those sort of outcomes that we saw?
Yeah, well, so Kantar, if people aren't aware, are a big research organisation across the world. Every year we get a research done with, I think it's 250 leaders in industry around leasing and leasing software. And it's interesting, leasing is becoming more popular. That's probably not surprising because in the economic climate that we're in, it makes commercial sense. Why would you use your CapEx when you can lease it? Probably surprising after the time it's been that we're still seeing people, A, without systems, but then also B, complaining that their process is terrible and long. So it's kind of like, well, kind of see a link here. But again, it's one of those things that people in the environment are sometimes a bit scared to make the jump to move to a system. They can't quite touch the benefits that they can see. And so that's interesting that in that same research that ease of use for staff and the like was really high on a system. Yeah, I would like a system, but it's got to be easy to put in and easy to use.
And to that point as well, there is also the two things, like one is reputational risk. If you're not doing your lease liability and ROU asset correctly, there's the audit risk where you could get an qualified audit opinion, but it's also the cost avoidance when the time spent reviewing it is longer than it should take. People don't realize there is additional cost that comes with that.
Yeah, I think if we go back to Stefan's point, we talked about it, like people are wedded to a process because it's a process, it's compliance, but it's almost like Stockholm syndrome. Until you take that step back and have a look at it, it's just, it is what we do. So you just get used to it. You get used to the pain. I always use the analogy, you pinch yourself enough times and it stops hurting.
Yeah. Well, the most obvious thing, and we still see it, is if you're a big business and you're quite decentralized, you're lucky that you've got a very centralized team, and so you can see the work levels that are going in. And if you're a very decentralized business, you're going to have people all over the business doing parts of this. And so when you go, well, it's probably wasting people's time 20%. Once you add up all those people that are wasting their time and unhappy in their role, it's interesting. A decent piece of software will pay for itself very quickly. And that's probably hard to see in the current economic climate. But we're seeing more and more people now going, right, we've had enough. We can see the value.
Yeah, makes total sense. I mean, we're coming up to one of those sort of crucial points now, certainly in Australia, for it's audit time. What can people be doing? Actually take a step back, because we've gone through it in New Zealand. What's the feedback around what auditors are focusing on at the moment that everyone should be aware of, notwithstanding we're a couple of days to go, but there's still time. What should we be looking for? What should people try and look at in advance and preempt?
So I guess The obvious one is there's still people who are out there without systems, and it's just getting less and less tolerated by auditors because the auditors have to do more work. So the false economy of a spreadsheet is really a false economy because they'll have to spend more work substantive testing your work. After that, for the people with systems, and back to our earlier discussions, those data points are really key. And again, proper system, you should have the document in the system. So you don't even need to talk to your auditor. They can actually tick the buttons in the system. And then to Noraini's point, policy and process, right? Know what it is, know what the policy is, and it should all just flow through. Every year we have, we're lucky because the system's been around for a long time. It's got SOC, it's got ISO. So generally auditors don't touch the calculations. It's like, yep, that works. But again, making sure that you're clear on those inputs that have come into those calculations. And that's as simple often as just having a PDF of a lease schedule. And if you have that all in one place, you don't even have to prepare it. So that comes back to your process. If you know what your policy is, you've got the PDF, you're kind of sailing. Then for modifications, same thing. Have a deed of variation, have the assumptions that you made, and off you go. So it's not rocket science, but what can happen, especially in bigger businesses that might be a bit decentralized, people don't know, they make assumptions, and then people don't know there's a risk sitting there somewhere. And that's why that policy and process is still really important.
If I can add to that as well, like the auditors are also very focused on control. So improved control environment is a big tick for them.
You'd feel that with a system you should get a big tick, but then not all are created equally, and so the use of cross checks, so both a GL and an Excel report, audit reports. Okay, show me all the modifications I've made. Show me your GL, and that. So being able to verify from a second point of source information is really important.
And you're only from your journey from this time last year to this time now, from an audit perspective, what are the biggest impacts, changes, and stuff that you can preempt with your auditors so that they're not coming in going, here we go again, or not saying that that's you, but this is what we're seeing by other organisations,
Look, you're not entirely wrong there. So we to that point of improved control environment where we had a system, but we went back to Excel. The lack of transparency in terms of like what the system is doing. So our auditors are very supportive of this new system because of the clean audit trail that they could go and look at it. But then at the same time, I don't know if people on the webinar have seen the system, but there is this amortization schedule that LOIS, the system, produced that basically mirror our auditors' workbook. So that gives them more confidence. Basically, they don't have to spend the time doing the work. We produce it for them, and it's all kind of SOC compliance and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
That might be because a couple of the auditors are using the system secretly. Coming to see you as well. Upgrading. Finally, technology. We've talked about lots of different things with regards to systemization of process, etc. We've gone over and over it, but what are the sort of the areas within, technological improvements, that A, we're seeing now, and then B, we're seeing or need to see or want to see in the future? Everyone's talking AI. Everything's about AI. Kids talk about AI. But that's more for drawing new superheroes. But, where does all this fit in? Because we've seen some interesting data recently about that, and I actually think it's a really great closing of the circle, the loop around what we talked about earlier with regards to data. But Stefan, what are you sort of seeing around this technological aspect?
Yeah, so I guess the quote you've got up there is from the ADAPT guys that basically did a survey and said that AI, the data is not ready. Interesting enough, it's moving so fast and it can do some amazing stuff, but a lot of businesses just simply aren't ready because the data is so unstructured. what we've seen practically for us and our clients, that if that data can be structured, there's a lot that can be done with it. Probably 4 or 5 years ago, lease extraction by AI was a big buzzword, but it was, to be honest, quite terrible, because the amount of errors that were made kind of offset the efficiency that should be gained. Lease extraction now is much, much better, and it's something that we're looking to build into the system, because although by their natures leases are non-standard and won't get 100% of it, if you can get like 80 or so, it will be great. But also, once the data is in a relational database, which obviously it is, you can report and do a lot more on that. And so with the release of the fleet and property products, you can see a lot more of this analysis provided, and the data shown in different ways, and AI really enables more and more of that as we build in functionality. But I mean, we sound like broken records. It comes back to that data play. Unstructured data, AI over it, it's going to be messy. Now you've got structured data and a relational database and more functionality. We're just going to see that rise and rise, I think. And AI will probably rise and fall. You saw it kind of back when the search engines came into being.
Don't let them hear you say that.
Yeah. And they'll be coming for my job.
Exactly.
So the first round is unlikely to be the best stuff, but you're seeing a lot of new stuff coming out where it can do a lot more functionality, not just in efficiencies, but analysis as well.
Noraini, how's Connexa looking at this full tech stack?
Yeah, so
Thanks.
AI is a big thing for us. We're in that AI journey, but in the lease space, in the finance space, we're still quite young, early, I would say. We basically, my target at the moment is really to get to use it in the data space. We're starting with like high volume, repeatable process so that the AI can augment it, reduce risk. We're not replacing human judgment. That's the starting point, kind of echoing what you said. But the second step, what I like to see, I kind of like that you mentioned the lease extraction piece. So automation around like reading the agreement, making sure we kind of put like pulling all the key lease the points in there. And the other thing that I really like to look at is around like something that can scan our AP payments and detect duplicates and detect anomalies and things like that. So that's kind of where I'm looking to do to explore.
Is this sort of all part of that identification process that we talked about at the start? You're looking for gaps, you're looking at areas to plug the technology in for the efficiencies, for the compliance, for the accuracy, etc.
Yeah, I think what has been largely missed a lot of the time is the user cases for how to use AI. It's quite hard to, off the shelf, for the normal person to go, well, what do I use it for? Like we all probably know, because we use Microsoft, you use Copilot to write an email. That might save you a minute a day or whatever. That's not really going to move the dial. So ourselves as vendors have a responsibility to kind of work out what tech is reasonable and how it can make other people's jobs easier. Because it's all well and good saying, oh, we're going to use AI, but there's a period of time there to get user cases, work out how to use it and do that kind of thing. So I think there's kind of two steps. There's that enablement and efficiency side of things that people will go on a natural journey, both as a business and an individual, but also as a vendor and a software company. It's something that we're actively looking at to bring the best to people to make their jobs easier. And it can be something really simple, well, not simple, but like an extraction device, or could it be more than that? Could it be like a native engine to interrogate data or the like? So there's some pretty cool developments coming out, and I think now that we've brought more functionality for property and fleet in particular, we've got a much more holistic view of the whole leasing world, from compliance and commercial. So you see a lot more application than straight compliance, because I think it'd have to be one smart robot to do an IFRS 16 technical journals, I tell you what.
We've got a question that's just come through. It says, within my workplace, we have several leases which continue on existing terms after the formal lease term ends. In the absence of any further documentation or signed agreements, what are the key points of concerns that I should be aware of as an IFRS 16 accountant?
So it's a holdover. So that's the common term for a lease like that. So, and it's really common in certain industries that it will just tick along at the same monthly contractual obligations. Depending on who you talk to, as an auditors, there's different views on it. But the reasonably accepted review is that you have to determine a period of time that is reasonably certain for the lease to be held to, and then you generally treat it as an extension. That advice comes with the usual caveats that please talk to your auditors and all of that kind of thing. Some people drop them off the lease completely and try and treat them as a short-term lease. That's probably a little aggressive for most auditors. So most auditors would probably expect a 6-month extension or the like.
Yeah, so we have a lot of that as well, where leases are in holdover. One tips I would say is document it properly in terms of what the company's decision is, what your policy is around holdover. For example, if it has expired, it's in holdover, we extend it by a year each time or by a month each time, and document it properly, and your auditors should be, I'll put a caveat to that too, but
That's actually a really good thing. That comes back to the policy as well. So the last thing you want is Bob in Auckland extending it for a year and Mary in Wellington going, well, actually now it's a short-term lease and taking it completely. So again, that comes back to the policy and process bit, and the system will do whatever you want it to do.
Okay, well, look, I think if we get to the key takeaways from today, thanks very much, because this has been really insightful. Really, really appreciate both the practical aspects, both you around it. I mean, if we're looking at probably two key things, it's foundations, which comes from your process documentation in your IFRS 16 policy, and that probably goes across plenty of areas within a business. And I think then data. If you start with those two foundations, then I think you've got a lot to build on from there. I think, like we said, bad data into a system is not going to spit out the right things, and not all systems will do that. And then it gets down to even some of the next phases within, the development of not only products but businesses, being AI, etc. How is that going to work? Any sort of wrap ups that you've got, Noraini, before we go today?
I'll probably sound like a broken record, but I said invest in the initial system processes, data, and then you can free up your time to do other stuff.
What would that other stuff be if you'd like to free up other time? What would it be?
It's still your day job, but yeah, like you're not consumed by the data and the repetitive processes.
Well, our systems must be pretty good. Stefan's playing golf tomorrow. Stefan, anything from you to wrap it up?
I think to that point, yeah, the data's the key. But probably a thing that's been often overlooked, especially with IFRS 16, is that the finance people have been accountable for the data and the processing of it. But if you think about it, finance are not originating any of that data, right? Finance don't go out and negotiate leases with landlords or get fleet with fleet properties. So if you can bring those other stakeholders into the process, ideally on the same system, give them the tools they need to do their job. So actually the data goes in, not multiple points, once, that makes a flow. And so what we're seeing now is it's not a silo. Have a central database, but have different people populating it. Have property do the property stuff. Have finance do the finance stuff, and have fleet do the fleet stuff. So that nirvana gets you to a point where you actually get a return on investment, not just a compliance tool. And most companies won't be able to get this straight away, but it's kind of a journey that if you can enable people to do their jobs better, you'll get much more benefits. And I guess also don't be scared of change. The other thing to your point earlier is, this takes me a week, but imagine how long it will take to put it in the system. Well, actually, it doesn't take that long. So if you're losing a week a month, it ain't going to take 12 weeks to put it in the system. Well, it shouldn't. So it's something we should look at.
No, I think it's been really, really beneficial. thanks to everyone for joining again. Any questions, comments, please come through to us. We'll be sending follow-up details. Also, the recording, you haven't been able to sit through everything, but there's some really good takeaways. So, Rani, really appreciate your honesty and openness in this because it has been really insightful. Stefan, always good to have you here.
Cheers, mate.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, thanks
you.
very much.